Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm AJ Legault. You're watching Grand Theft House. Tonight, an in-depth look at the mortgage fraud that led to the recent announcement of an unprecedented $26 billion penalty against 5 of America's biggest banks.
We have reached a landmark settlement with the nation's largest banks that will speed relief to the hardest hit homeowners.
Many of those hard hit homeowners right here in the Commonwealth.
I collapsed. I couldn't believe that I just lost my home.
This laid off Richmond school teacher lost her home to foreclosure in December.
I had a beautiful home. I'm sorry. And I became a rentee instead of a homeowner.
Others, like Daryl and Carrie Henderson, have been battling with their bank over foreclosure proceedings for some time.
We are actually in a bad mortgage, and it's the payments are higher than what we thought they would be.
We showed up at the Hendersons' door last summer with mortgage documents for their home that we'd found inside the Chesterfield County Courthouse. They couldn't believe what we had to show them.
This could be, a saving grace for us.
What Daryl called a saving grace is in fact a signature that reads Linda Green. We found that signature on his mortgage and numerous others like Mary Mitchell's.
I had no idea that anything of this nature was going on.
As part of our investigation, we went to the courthouses in Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield, and in a matter of just minutes, found Linda Green's signatures on countless area families' mortgages. She's listed under a number of titles, allegedly working for numerous banks.
Is a very important woman, according to all these papers.
But look at the signatures. You don't have to be a handwriting expert to see they were not signed by the same person. That makes them fraudulent. We found more than 20 different variations of the Linda Green signature in courthouses right here in the Metro Richmond area. Prime examples of a term that's now a familiar part of the American vocabulary. Robo-signing, a fancy phrase for fraud and perjury on legal mortgage papers.
Anybody can look at them papers and see that the things are not written right and things are not done right. And it's all screwed up.
We sat down with Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli last summer to discuss our findings.
They were looking for speed, I think, at certain points in time, obviously at the expense of other things like honesty and following the law.
Here's what was happening. Many of America's biggest banks hired outside parties such as the Georgia-based company Docs to manufacture documents during the housing bubble. They often signed papers without ever looking at them, using fake titles and names such as Linda Green. And Linda Green's certainly not the only questionable signature used. Our investigation, spanning more than a year, uncovered dozens of different robo-sign names on thousands of mortgages here in Central Virginia. Take a look at this. Here's at least 4 different variations of the signature for a Correll Harp, who, if all these papers are to be believed, is a vice president of SunTrust, American Home Mortgaging, Option 1 Mortgage Company, and Mortgage Electronic Registration Systems, Inc., aka MERS, all at the same time. This bogus paperwork was then used to foreclose on families' homes.
We are regularly seeing falsified documents.
A practice that has had attorneys like Tom Dominowski with the Legal Aid Justice Center.
They just were creating false paperwork.
And community activists such as Reverend Clyde Ellis.
What has been perpetrated upon the American community is an injustice by our financial institutions.
Crying foul. Last November, we showed you how Ellis's community action group, Voice for Justice, set out to research just how extensive the fraudulent paperwork fiasco was in just one jurisdiction.
Examine what it appeared nobody else in our jurisdiction was examining.
They pulled the records on 10% of the 16,000 foreclosures in Prince William County from 2004 to 2009, more than 1,600 documents.
As we pulled up those documents, we found some things that just cannot bear to be overlooked.
They uncovered a mirror image of what our 8 News investigative unit had been reporting on for some time. Families forced out of their homes with fraudulently manufactured paperwork.
For instance, we have here one example of a woman alternately named Chris or Christine Anderson, depending on which signature is being indicated, who signed for 7 different financial institutions, all as a vice president. And the signatures for these 7 different Christine Andersons for 7 different institutions clearly do not match.
The signatures are a fraud. A fraud on a legal document. That, in theory, makes the documents no good. Their findings and ours caused a number of homeowners like John White to begin using this evidence to fight their foreclosure.
If I walk out of this, I walk out with nothing. So I will definitely fight for my property.
It's a fight many, like President Obama, are now hoping has come to a ceasefire with the record $26 billion payment the big banks have agreed to.
This isn't just good for these families. It's good for their neighborhoods, it's good for their communities, and it's good for our economy.
After the break, we'll take a look at just what the new mortgage fraud settlement will mean for Virginia homeowners. Stay with us. And welcome back to our special report, Grand Theft House. We continue now with our look at the massive mortgage fraud settlement and the criminal behavior by banks that led up to it.
To me, and I know it's bad to say, they actually stole my home from under me.
A system of almost unparalleled fraud. Signatures buried in mortgage documents that, when paired with other shady banking practices, have been used to help force families out of their homes.
I couldn't believe that I just lost my home.
The theft has been perpetrated with blatantly falsified legal documents. We've shown you the dozens of variations of the signature for Linda Green we found on mortgage papers in area courthouses. Here's another great example of bogus John Hancock's. Take a look at the signature on this mortgage paperwork filed in Chesterfield County. Crystal Moore is listed as a vice president, and Brian Bly is the notary public. But on this other mortgage, Brian Bly is the VP of a different bank, and Crystal Moore is the notary. And even more telling, compare the signatures on the two documents. You don't need 20/20 vision to see they don't match.
Really, it makes a mockery of home ownership.
These blatant forgeries are the legal documents used to foreclose on people's homes.
What we've seen over the past year, just banks and servicers and lenders signing documents without paying attention to them, using fraudulent signatures, fraudulent people.
We showed the Brian Bly Crystal Moore papers to Republican delegate Bob Marshall, who sponsored several bills in the General Assembly this year to crack down on foreclosure fraud.
This is fraudulent. These are documents that should be resulting in fraud prosecutions in Virginia.
The Virginia Bankers Association had a different reaction when we showed them the exact same paperwork.
There's nothing on these documents to suggest any impropriety.
This interview was shot just days before the national fraud settlement was announced.
You said you don't see any impropriety on there. How is that when it looks like forgeries? On one or the other, it seemed like it'd have to be.
Yeah, I'm not in a position to evaluate what's there.
The Virginia Bankers Association, which the Virginia Public Access Project shows shelled out more than $330,000 in campaign contributions for lawmakers in the Commonwealth last year, is opposing any change in the law.
There has been much progress made in the last 12 months in terms of improved servicing and more federal oversight.
That would strengthen penalties on a state level against lending institutions caught foreclosing using falsified paperwork.
Assuming no one condones fraud, what would be the problem with this bill?
There's just no reason to go beyond where the law already is.
While the bankers' lobbying group won their battle to kill Delegate Marshall's bills, State Senator Chap Peterson's similar legislation,
it targets illegal conduct,
just passed the Senate with a fair measure of bipartisan support, but still faces a tough battle in the House, where it was killed last year.
Where we have foreclosures that were obtained illegally, unlawfully, with fabricated documents, that shows a disrespect for law, and of course it's put families out on the street.
Now, as a form of restitution for their role in the mortgage mess, these 5 banks have agreed to spend $26 billion to finally help nearly 1 million struggling homeowners, either refinancing their mortgage rate or modifying their mortgage altogether, something they refused to do for this laid-off Richmond school teacher just a few months ago.
Wait a minute. You told me it was in review. Oh, well, we decided it was, we can't do it. So that day, they sold my home.
Under the settlement, banks will pay about $31 million in the form of $2,000 cash payments to Virginians who experienced foreclosure abuses from January 1st, 08 to December 31st, 2011. Many, like Esther Ramirez, argue it's not enough.
I put close to $200,000 into that home in my payments. So for what? Nothing to show for it.
Even President Obama recognizing this settlement won't move anyone back into their home they lost to foreclosure.
No compensation, no amount of money, no measure of justice is enough to make it right for a family who's had their piece of the American dream wrongly taken from them.
The settlement excludes mortgages owned by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, meaning almost half the nation's mortgage holders are ineligible. Thanks for joining me tonight for Grand Theft House.
It's the